With video games becoming widely popular after years of suppression, it was a no-brainer that big players in other industries would want a piece of that pie. Video games today generate almost, or if not more, yearly revenue than any other form of media currently available, making it a very lucrative opportunity for a big company like Disney, for example. Loaning out IPs and creating games based on those IPs, especially when they're ones like Star Wars, can be a massive boost to yearly revenue, considering all Disney has to do is loan out the rights of their IPs for those games to exist, which makes Disney's want to own a studio to produce games internally and become a games publisher all the weirder. A few weeks back, Bloomberg reported that Disney are being pressured by investors to acquire a studio on the scale of an EA to transform Disney's gaming venture from licensing into publishing. What I want to discuss today is who I think Disney are going to acquire and what this would mean for Star Wars games and so on, knowing Disney will want all games containing their IPs to be made by the studio they acquire. First off, let's address the elephant in the room. Disney's only real options for acquisitions, in my opinion, are either EA or Square, knowing they have relationships with both. EA, with the help of Respawn, have created a Star Wars universe more loved than the new trilogy, and SquareEnix created Kingdom Hearts over 10 years ago, which fused action RPG mechanics with Disney characters to create a massively loved game series. Maybe I'm incorrect and Disney does go after a smaller and lesser known studio, but even saying that makes no sense for a company known for big acquisitions, with Hulu and Fox being prime examples. The reality of this situation is if Disney is unable to acquire a big player like an EA, they will just stay their course and continue loaning out their IPs to said game studios until the time comes where one of the aforementioned studios is either struggling or in need of financial aid to swoop in and acquire them. I could be wrong, this is my opinion of course, but acting like Disney is going to come into gaming with an unknown and unproven studio to make Star Wars games is a bit naive, I think. The more interesting question to ask is what happens to an EA or Square's other studios and IPs that aren't Disney related, knowing Disney will want them making games based on their IPs instead. Again, maybe I'm looking at this too cynically and nothing of the sort is going to happen, but I have a hard time imagining Disney would pay multi-millions for an acquisition for them not to make more games based on their IPs. I know I'm presenting a dystopian world here, but we're talking about Disney and not Microsoft, whose acquisitions were solely for IP and talent to flood Game Pass with. Disney have the IPs to make massive games, they just don't have the talent to do so, which is why I'm presenting this idea. I understand that Disney stopping the production of games like Mass Effect would make no sense knowing how big those games are, but acting like Disney of all people are going to come into gaming with conventional means is silly. Moreover, I wonder what is going to happen to Disney's existing relationships with studios wanting to use their IPs if they do end up acquiring an EA. Disney have shown in the past that they can change their mind at a moment's notice, so having to rely on them for IP purposes for games like Star Wars is a scary thought, especially if they do become a publisher. A thought I've been stuck on for a while now is after the existing contracts that bind them run out, what happens to games like Wolverine, knowing Disney would want that type of game being made in-house. At the end of the day, I can speculate forever, but if I'm being honest, we all know what's going to happen. Disney will only let the studio they acquire make games based on their IPs, and the loaning out of those IPs will stop for as long as they are a publisher, which I think is unhealthy for them and gaming. But Disney's investors are blinded by the massive successes that are Sony's Spiderman games, and their internal greed won't let them miss out. If we take the investors' words as truth, Disney have no interest in continuing to loan out their IPs, but I think their attitude could end up hurting them badly in the long run if the games they make do not live up to the expectations of the games that came before. I can't help but think Disney's ambition to become a publisher was sparked by Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard, which if true could spell the end for the games industry as we know it. I've been quite open about my views on the topic of acquisitions, and this only adds another company to the list. How anyone supports the expansion of these billion-dollar companies through massive money deals will never cease to amaze me. I think acquisitions can be healthy for both the industry and the studio that is bought, but the way it's currently being handled is not healthy. Disney breathes the same air as Microsoft when it comes to their approach to situations like this, where they care not for the industry but for their own pocket instead. I can live with Microsoft being the only company in gaming with enough market share to do the things they have, but adding another in the form of a Disney or Amazon would be too much in my opinion. Competition is important for the growth and betterment of an industry, and when massive corporations feel the need to turn that industry into their playground spells the end for that industry. I feel something worth mentioning is the fact that Disney would not be the first company within the movie or TV space dipping their hands into gaming. Both WB and Netflix are entrenched or trying to entrench themselves in the space, be that with subscription services or games based on their own IPs, with Warner Brothers being the idealistic outcome for Disney. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that WB is a good company and that they should be praised, but what WB has and are continuing to do within gaming is exactly what Disney wants, where they have complete control over their massive IPs. Warner Brothers currently own all things DC Comics, meaning they own IPs like Superman and Batman, which are massive properties they can leverage over gaming markets, making my Disney comparison all the more clear. The reason I'm comparing both is to put forward this idea that what Disney wants will eventually cause their downfall. For a while now, Warner Brothers have been on a decline in gaming, and this is shown by how willing they were not too long ago to sell their gaming studios, with the makers of Mortal Kombat being on that list. The greed these companies feel put them into positions like this, where if they had just loaned out their IPs instead of wanting all the money for themselves, they would have been in a happier situation situation than they currently are. An idea Disney might have already have had is adding a game streaming portion to Disney Plus that would include all or if not some of the games containing Disney IPs. Good subscription services today are becoming more successful, and this is why Netflix is trying to jump into the market. I've made my opinion on the topic of subscription services pretty clear, but that doesn't change the fact that when paired with a great entry price and good games, they become widely successful. Gaming is going through multiple changes that include the rise of things like subscription services, and then the fire that causes big companies like Disney want to rise to the top of it because gaming is a gigantic moneymaker in today's day and age. Adding to my point, I could totally see EA Play being turned into the gaming side of Disney Plus if they do end up being purchased by Disney, which how you look at it could be a good or bad thing depending on if you like EA Play or not. In my time talking about this, I've come to the conclusion that Disney will dip their feet into the gaming space in a more direct way than they have before, be that with the aforementioned subscription service or buying a whole company like EA. I just hope in doing so they don't become the next Microsoft. I have my concerns on what this could mean for existing and new games with Disney IPs, but if my fears are unfounded, more competition within gaming is always good. Make it what you will, but I don't like the idea of EA being dissolved into Disney. Personally, unless they are in desperate need of investment, having independent companies with no explicit ties to any other company is something I think is good. If you could take one thing away from this video, I would hope it would be the idea that having open arms to any big corporation entering a space is not good for the average consumer.